Hello North Shore friends. I'm going to take a quick second to talk about grief, as there are many things to grieve in this season of the pandemic. And as we know that we have a good God who has brought about the end of our story, where there is hope and everlasting life and all tears are wiped away, in light of the reality of Jesus walking with us and having brought about the end of our story already, we get to live in truth and walk in the light of what we're actually experiencing emotionally now. So my invitation to you, especially in this season, is that you create pockets and spaces and times to process, to talk about, to bear one another's burdens with, to talk about your emotions, to talk about your actual experiences of what's going on that you maybe think you shouldn't be feeling because you know the end of the story, right? But John 11 has been on my heart. So this is where Jesus enters into grief, where he actually weeps with the people that he's with, right? This powerful experience where he knows he's going to resurrect Lazarus in John 11. But first, he is troubled in spirit. He's deeply moved in spirit and troubled. So first he rages against death, this indicator we are not made for this. We're made for life. It's right and good to rage against death. And then he weeps, right? He enters that vulnerable, uncomfortable place none of us like really feeling, and he offers that generously. So he actually enters into the grief with the people around him to move through it. And that's going to be my invitation to you, and to not do it by yourself. So whether that means getting on a FaceTime call or a Skype call, a Zoom, a Marco Polo, find someone to talk through this with, because sadness, sorrow, these things, when we grieve, they take us through the grief, right? They move us. And when we're avoiding what we're feeling and we're avoiding our hearts, we tend to get stuck. And then other behaviors show up that aren't going to be helpful. They can be kind of maladaptive. So grief is like, I imagine a pool that you've got to swim through to get through it. And some of us kind of want to just like talk about how the pool is so annoying and inconvenient, and we want to like distract ourselves from the pool. But my invitation to you, this pool of emotions you've got to swim through, is to find someone to swim with you, and then to realize, hey, we all grieve differently and in different ways. So the emotional needs in your household or in your friend group, in your family, whatever it is, they're going to be different, and that is totally okay. We want to acknowledge that everyone has different emotional needs in this season. So that could mean, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief are what? They're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And they don't come in a sequential order when you're experiencing them. When you're going through grief, right? You experience some anger sometimes, some depression sometimes. You go back to that shock, that denial part sometimes, and that's okay. It's cyclical, it comes back around. But you keep validating and acknowledging when you're actually experiencing some of those emotions so that you can move through them. Because we're back to our swimming pool of grief here, where humor, something like that, is great. When you're thinking like you're swimming, I imagine using a distractor like humor, joking. There's some great stuff out there right now to watch. As long as it's like bringing your head up, right, out of the water when you're swimming, to take a breath. And the hope is that humor, that distracting, whether it's playing a game, playing the piano, whatever it is, that actually allows you to keep swimming, to put your head down and again go back to acknowledging this is hard and we're in it together and we have a God who walks with us. So the distractions and the activities and all the things we're reading, they're great. Keep on using them as long as they help you move through the grief. And it's very tempting to kind of think we've got it right when we figure out, oh, this is what's helpful for me. Journaling is helpful for me. Listening to some music, listening to a podcast is helping me get through this. That's wonderful. But we want to acknowledge as we bear one another's burdens that something different is going to help someone else. They might need more time watching some Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, some humor, to take a breath before they can enter into their sorrow and their losses. So my hope is you're going to give each other a ton of grace to be where you are, to live in the light, and also that you're going to name your losses in this time so that you can move through the grief, right? Because there are losses some of us have never thought we would face. Losing senior prom, graduation. There are internships that aren't able to happen right now for nursing school because we're not able to be out in public in the same way. There's loss of physical contact for some of us that miss getting to hold our friends' babies. And we want to name these things, bring them before the Lord who sees them, who enters into our grief with us. And this is where we live in that now but not yet, who has conquered death, which means we know the end of our story, right? We get to grieve as those who have hope, which is such a gift of being a Christian, right? We can both live in the light of how hard this is and confusing, And we can continue to hold up the word of life, Jesus, and say, yes, like you are real, you have traveled this road before, you felt all the things we're ever going to feel, you entered into them, showing us and inviting us to courageously and vulnerably walk in them together, and you resurrected. You wrote the end of the story and invite us to live in light of that. So Easter is coming, thanks be to God. In the meantime, let's both hold up that hope and walk in light and in truth of the reality of what's going on in our hearts together, providing lots of grace for one another as we have different needs.